and welcome to Hurt Less, Live More with me, JJ, the practical alchemist, and the renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Mark Goulston. And today we have a wonderful guest for some open and raw conversation about the hurts we've all experienced and how we manage to hurt less. And that guest is Genevieve Piturro. And Mark, I will let you do the proper introduction to Genevieve, but welcome, Genevieve.
Thank you, JJ.
Well, I don't know how proper I can be if, according to your British listeners, I'm a loosey-goosey California guy, but I'll do the best I can.
Go for it.
Anyway, I'm so pleased to see Genevieve Piturro again. She was on my other podcast, my Wake Up Call, and well, you'll see why we're having this conversation with her. She's the founder of the nonprofit Pajama Program and the author of Purpose, Passion, and Pajamas. Her wake-up call occurred in the middle of a successful entertainment executive career when she met a 6-year-old in a protective shelter whose simple question blew her away and changed the rest of her life. And I think the reason I wanted Genevieve on is I think it really touched Genevieve deeply, and it gave her a compassion for the hurt of this young girl and the hurt of the world, and she had to do something about it. So welcome, Genevieve.
Thank you, Mark. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, welcome, Genevieve. So tell us what this was. Tell us what happened, because it really set you off on a journey to do something fantastic in the world. So tell us about that.
Yes, I didn't know what it would change, except in the moment, it changed everything for me personally. As Mark said, I was working in television because I always wanted to work in television, and being the firstborn of 4 with a dad who came by boat from Italy to give children, that he would have an education and a better life. I really felt expected to have children, to get married and have kids, because I know that's what traditionally he expected, both my parents. But I wanted to be that Mary Tyler Moore. I wanted to be that business professional in a big city, which for me was New York. And so that's what my route was. And I worked hard for 12 years to grow in the entertainment business and be a marketing executive. One day in my apartment, I was single and, just sitting, waiting for a friend to come over. I heard a voice in me that asked me a question, and it asked me, if this is the next 30 years of your life, is this enough? Mm. And that was the first of the 2 questions that rocked my world, because I'd never heard me ask me a question. And it scared me because I knew it came from something in me, but something greater than me. And the other thing was that right away, I knew the answer was no. And I knew that I had missed a lot when I had made my decision to be a corporate executive and just sort of put the family thing on the way back burner. And I realized, there were a lot of values in family, and I didn't have any children. And how could I bring children into my life at this point? So I remembered a story on TV about a child who was taken out of a family situation. I say family loosely, who was really, really traumatized and hurt by the people who were supposed to take care of him. And I called the police and I asked where they bring these children, because I knew it wasn't the first one I'd read about. And he told me about emergency shelters and gave me a few of the names. I called and I asked if I could come and read to the children at night. I don't know why I said read to the children at night. I knew why I said night, because I worked all day. And I figured I could read. So they welcomed me in. And so once or twice a week, I'd go in my business suit with children's books, and I'd read to these children. And the first time it was really difficult to grasp, because the children it was an emergency shelter, which was a place where the social workers and police took children who were mistreated or worse to sort of process them, which is an ugly word for what you do with children, right? So I was there to read them stories, to occupy their time while they were being processed. And the sight of them just paralyzed me, because they were dressed in clothes that were soiled or tight, usually not enough clothes. Some appeared worse, and I knew that whatever trauma it was, I wouldn't be privy to the details, but this was painful. And I couldn't imagine how painful painful it was for them, because it was painful for me to see. But I read in silence because they were pretty quiet. One night after a few weeks, I followed to see where they were taking these children in to go to sleep. And I looked into an equally bare room as the one I was reading to, a couple of futons and single beds, and children huddled together. And these memories of my mom and the four of us kids when we were kids at our bedtime was just the total opposite of what I was seeing. These children, crying, and I don't know how they could fall asleep, because where was somebody to sit at their bedside? Where were the stories? Where were the pajamas? They were sleeping in their clothes that were tight and like I said, soiled. And I asked if I could bring pajamas next week, and it just fell out of my mouth. I can remember telling you now just how it was. I was surprised it fell out of my mouth, that question. And I thought it was a lovely idea, so I brought pajamas the next time. And when I started to give them out after I read, put them on the table, went over to each child with a pair of my big bag that I thought would fit them, a little girl was afraid of me, and she kept backing off, and she kept shaking her head. No, no, no. She didn't want any part of what I had in the bag. And she wanted to watch me, though, give them to the other kids. And I couldn't figure out why she was so afraid. The other kids quietly took the pair of pajamas, went with the staff to that bedroom, and she was there watching in the corner with the staff person. And I went over slowly. I had the pair of pink pajamas I had tried to give her originally, and I knelt down and I tried to gently talk to her about these are pajamas that'll fit you, and they're so soft, they're pink. Would you like to feel how nice they are? You can keep them forever. And she leaned in and she whispered, "What are pajamas?" Mm. And that was a question that in a million years I'd never expected to hear from any of these children, even though I knew where they'd come from was different than where I'd come from. And it just, I say, I was so glad I was kneeling down, because I would have fallen down. It just rocked me. I didn't think I heard her right, but of course I had. And thank goodness I kept it together, and I explained what pajamas are to a little girl. And she took them. They helped her put them on in another room, and she peeked out to show me she was wearing them. And that was it. Whatever her pain was before she put those pajamas on, and sure, continues, I felt it. I felt that connection. I felt that pain. And we're talking about pain. I believe that every time I told that story, Pajama Program is more than 20 years old, 42 chapters around the U.S., 7 million pairs of pajamas we've given and counting. Reading centers to give these children a morsel of bedtime peace and love and hug. I believe that when I started to tell that story, the person I was telling felt that little girl too. And I think that that's in us. There's some kind of a hole or a feeling that feels like that pain that she felt. And I think that's why people felt compelled, like I did, to do something about this.
That's amazing. What do you think that pain is? Where does it come from?
Rejection, not belonging.
Rejection. Yeah.
I think there's something in there, and you can believe whatever you believe. I believe in God. I believe in the universe. I believe in the source. I believe, if you believe in past lives, if you believe in anything, I think it's there, and of course there are things that happen that we don't remember that have shaped us as adults. I don't know what it is for everyone, and most of us don't know what it is in ourselves, but we feel it.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, Mark, go
on. Thank you, Genevieve. Thank you for touching both of us and our listeners. You felt compassion, and I bring that up because the world seems, at least in America, seems to be chasing after more sooner, because Americans hate less later. and just chasing after excitement. And excitement can be very, exciting and invigorating. And as I'm listening to you, I think compassion, it touches us in a different way. I think it can be more satisfying and fulfilling, especially when you look into the eyes of someone and you've been kind to them, and it's not there to help your career. It's not there to make you more money. And they just look at you with their eyes, and it's what I call you've given the invisible people the gift of being visible for a moment.
That's a good way of putting it, Mark.
So was that, do you think that was part of the switch that happened in you, is when she said that, it touched a part of you that had been sort of touched, but it really just brought it to a focus. And you knew you had to do something about that, which is a different energy than when you were in your executive career. Oh, here's an opportunity. I want to do something about it because I can get promoted and make more money. So can you talk about what might have happened inside you internally?
Sure. Yes, something changed. She touched something in me that was asleep, let's say. Something that I hadn't felt. And I think that was a problem. And I think we all, for some reason, are afraid of deep emotions, even if they're happy ones. It's uncomfortable for some reason for some of us, and certainly the last 3 years and the COVID really put us in turmoil as far as emotions and our feelings, and coming out of it, still trying to figure it out, right? Do we feel more? Do we feel less? Is it better to protect? Is it better to just say, thank God we're together. Give me a hug. People were grappling with that, which is absurd when you think about it, right? I talk about the human connection, and we're in this together. We went through this together. Not everybody had the same experience. And, I send my love to those who've lost people they loved and knew during COVID. And it's just, she touched something that I didn't even know was there, because clearly I was an executive. I didn't choose to go into nonprofit or even, any of the humanities. I wanted to be an executive, and I wanted to help I want to make people feel good watching the favorite shows, but it doesn't compare to what people do to help other people.
JJ, let me ask you, because we kid around, and Brits are, they're sort of notoriously known for poo-pooing emotions. You may have feelings, but stay away from them. Certainly don't share them. Any thoughts about, or maybe even from your own experience, because Genevieve, we talk about our own experiences, but any thoughts about why people run away from feelings? Why we don't want to feel them? What is so scary about it?
It's just very hard, isn't it, to face your feelings sometimes, because the worry is that they're going to overcome you and you're not going to be able to operate normally, whatever normally is. And so we run away from them because we think as long as we can keep that at bay, we can be what we think we should be and what other people think we should be, right? I don't think that we are necessarily, we're certainly not devoid of feeling here in the UK, but we tend not to wear our feelings on our sleeve, but we certainly feel as deeply as anyone else. Maybe in the past, what's happened is that we haven't been encouraged to talk about feelings. So it's great that we have this show, for instance, because we're talking about feelings a lot on this show, and actually modeling the fact that it's not that hard really sometimes, and it can actually be very helpful. So it's that fear, I think, that keeps people from wearing their feelings on their sleeve, showing their emotions, because then you're vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, it's too easy to be attacked or to be put down or to, all these things that people are very scared of, particularly in the workplace.
It's a sign of weakness, right, JJ?
Correct. It's a sign of weakness. Yeah. So, I guess here in Britain, we've got the stiff upper lip
Motto.
which, actually isn't such a thing anymore, because we are learning that we can voice and show our feelings and our emotions. But that the stiff upper lip, I wonder whether that came out of the war, when you just had to keep calm and carry on, right? You just had to, you knew that bombs were falling all around you in London if you lived in London, but you just carried on. You didn't show that you were scared. Everybody was, I would guess, that a bomb was going to land on your house, but you carried on. So it's almost a protective thing, to protect you, to protect others around you, in that sense, to show that, everything's okay, really. And I wonder whether that's where it stems from in modern times.
During the pandemic, I co-authored a couple short books, and one was called "Why Cope When You Can Heal."
Yeah.
And what we talked about was the pandemic and how first responders and healthcare workers, we talked about something called the horror, terror, fragile triad. So when you see something that's horrific, you have to push down your thoughts and your feelings because you have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
One patient's in a horrible state, and then you have to deal with the next one. And then you're exhausted, and you go up behind your hospital, and there's not enough room in the morgue for bodies, so they put them in trucks. And you notice that, but you can't have any feelings. And then you go home, and when you go home and you don't have that much time to rest, the terror of what you just saw can grab you, and you start to feel fragile. But
Yeah.
you don't have the luxury of feeling fragile. You got to push it away, you push it down, and then you go back and it's Groundhog Day. You just repeat the same thing. And what we talked about is that, and this is probably true for people in war or first responders, is you have these coping mechanisms that help you survive, and danger releases all kinds of adrenaline, and adrenaline insulates you from your feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's why I just finished. That's why superstar athletes, soccer players and basketball players, they can play with a broken leg and not know it because the adrenaline's insulating it. But then when the danger goes away, it's like the insulation goes away, and all that stuff that you've pushed away. Maybe Genevieve, you can speak to this, because you use the word, there was a part of you that you hadn't felt or had been asleep, or you pushed away in order to be successful, and you pushed away and you say, this is great, but you didn't realize that you didn't feel quite like a human being. You were a human doing, and it was pretty exciting. And then something just sort of grabbed you.
Well, let's just hold that thought, though, Genevieve, because it's time for us to take a short break right now. But let's come back to you right after this from our station sponsors.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And you're listening to Hurt Less, Live More on UK Health Radio with me, JJ, the Practical Alchemist, Dr. Mark Goulston, and our wonderful guest today, Genevieve Piturro, author of Purpose, Passion and Pyjamas. And Genevieve, just before the break, Mark was asking you about what you were pushing down, maybe, and what came to you when you had that time, that moment with that child.
Right. Well, I think the best way to answer it, and I've been thinking about that now, is my goal of being a successful business executive, specifically in the entertainment business, was outwardly motivated, right? I wanted what the the world and my colleagues and my family would think was great, and what I would think was great and impressive, and give me the life that I wanted, right? The life we all want. And I found this to be the path I wanted. So I wanted success. I wanted to have a great life, travel, business, success, promotions, an office, all of that, which was outward based. So I spent a good amount of time in school leading up to college and getting this job, intent on that outcome, which, looking back, of course, is all outward based. When I met that little girl, it was from that moment on inward. I felt it inside. It didn't add up to anything on the outside the way a career, a high profile career would. Certainly never thought I'd be here talking to you 25 years later. Mm-hmm. All I can concentrate on at the time was this little girl and how many other little girls and boys were like this. I just wanted to find in my life a way to get pajamas to these children. That was it. And I cried all the time thinking about her. And years later, I cried on the stage telling people the story. And I met a wonderful man who I told I wanted to somehow find a way to make this my life's work and forget the TV business. And he actually said, I think you should go for it. I married him, and I would tell him from time to time as I was growing this, when I tell people the story, I want to cry, and I do everything I can to hold it in. And he said, let it out. And I said to him what, Mark, I think you said, if I let it out, I will not be able to do anything. I will not be able to finish the story. I won't be able to raise money. I won't be able to be in the room with these children because I will be crying all the time. And it's that way still.
Yeah.
And I think for all of us, we are afraid of that, letting that gush, opening those doors for the whatever it is that we've successfully kept inside, so that we have this facade of what we want ourselves to be. And we're afraid if the door is open even a little, we won't be able to get it back. The floods will begin, and that's it. We will lose all credibility. We will lose face. We will lose power. We will lose the relationships because we want to continue to be seen the way we have worked so hard to be seen. So I think that's part of it for me anyway.
No, I resonate with that very much. And again, it comes back to that stiff upper lip, doesn't it? You cannot let go, because otherwise you're just so scared that everything will fall apart. You'll fall apart. You'll burst into floods of tears, and everything will just dissolve around you. Right. It's that feeling, isn't it? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Which is scary.
Yeah. I had recently on my other podcast, a Brit named Jeff Dewing, Dewing, and he runs a pretty sizable company in the UK. Well, I think and he was talking about going through a rough period during the pandemic. And there was a moment, I'm not getting the most important facts wrong, but the particulars, when he needed to address his entire company, on Zoom, and he had to do some layoffs. And there was a point, and he's really strong, but, not an arrogant, condescending person, just a strong leader. And suddenly he just started crying. And he looked out at his whole company and he said, I don't know what to do. But he had hired such wonderful people, and he was such a good leader in helping develop them, that his direct reports said, Jeff, take a few days off, just unplug, and we'll mind the store and we'll figure it out. And 3 days later, he came back and they figured it out, and it was better than he would have come up with. And it totally changed the way he leads. And I think what he discovered is when you're a caring person and you do your best to help other people, when you lose control like that temporarily, people want to rush in to help you. I remember years ago, some coaching client said, can you send us some references of people you've coached? And I never asked for anything. I still have problems with that. And I said, gee, I don't know who I would ask, whatever. And I reached out to about 5 of my coaching clients, and 3 of them started crying. And I said, what are you crying about? And they said, we've been dying to tell the world how you helped us.
Mm.
And it just blew me away. It just blew me away. So I think what I would say to you, Genevieve, and to all our listeners, if you're surrounded by people who care about you, one of the best things you can do is bare your neck, and they will come in, and they may be dying to help you because of how grateful they are to you.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense? Go ahead, Genevieve.
Absolutely. Yes. It's embracing the human connection. And we forgot that. We never did it. Everybody's different, but that's the key. Purpose and the human connection are the pillars to a successful life, personally and in business. We need to share stories. We need to be real, and we need to let other people rally for us, because like you said, for this gentleman, they will, but they won't if you keep, arm's length, because they're not going to be vulnerable to say, let me help you, or even more, give you a hug. Maybe, oh my goodness, can you imagine how weak you might feel if you let somebody give you a hug if you're the leader? But when we let go of all that, and we're human, and this gentleman did it in a time when this world was at our lowest, you'd be amazed at how people rally for you, and just we put our arms around each other. And that's what I wanted to do with this little girl. And everybody wanted to put their arms around her and sit with her. There would have been a line around the world if we were allowed to line up and each sit with her for 5 minutes. Can you imagine? That's what we wanted to do. And that's what I say pyjamas were. It was a hug, just to hold her. And any of the children that receive these in bed at that vulnerable, frightening time.
Yes. And you can imagine how that you felt how she felt. You can imagine what it's like, though. You've gone through such trauma and been so deprived, as we would see it, of just normal things as we would see them, that she didn't know where to put herself in that situation. So, but how wonderful that you were able to give her that hug, as it were, and show her a different way to the way that she'd been used to. And those, I don't think I've ever been into one of those shelters, but I can imagine what they're like. And I have been as a journalist, I've been into some pretty deprived areas in my life, and it breaks your heart. It really does.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that probably was an issue for me as a journalist is that as a journalist, you're not supposed to really take sides. You're supposed to be the observer, the reporter. You can't actually do anything. Or many people feel that way anyway. Some journalists do step in. But it's a very difficult place to be as just the observer. It just wouldn't work for me these days. I couldn't do that.
But, right. And JJ, exactly what you're saying is why when we're watching the news or an interview and the interviewer stops and you can see he or she is choked up, or even more, can't hold it in because it's an emotional, it goes viral. People are like, oh my gosh, did you see this person's actually human? Look, she cried in interviewing him. He couldn't even speak when he was faced with this person. It's like the world stops, like, oh my goodness, did you see this? It's amazing.
Somebody actually behaved like a human being, right?
Yes, exactly. Because like you said, there are people who are trained to just be the observant and report and not feel. But we are just joyful and feel more connected to that person from that moment on.
Yes.
Than we were from anytime, no matter how excellent a reporter or broadcaster they were, now we care about them.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah.
It's interesting. And look, to all reporters and journalists, you can be human. I guess when you're giving a story, you're there to convey information. But I think when you're giving a story, people will listen to you. And if you're being objective, they'll choose to listen to you. But there's a hunger inside people to choose to connect with you. I'm a fair amount older than each of you. And this won't ring. Well, it'll ring true for you, JJ. And I'm thinking of the Princess Diana news when she died. And I know for me, I grew up in Boston, and I was in the 11th grade when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And I remember Walter Cronkite. Walter Cronkite was the voice of calm. I'm going to get emotional because I remember when he reported, he took off his glasses and he reported that John F. Kennedy had died. And I got to believe it's got to be one of the top 3 most powerful moments in his entire career. And he had a long career. And
yes.
and when that happened, we just connected. It was just remarkable.
Yeah. He went from being really, really good to great.
Yeah.
As a human being, like you said, JJ, as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. People saw the humanity in him. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we resonate with. We don't resonate with robots.
Right.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it's interesting though, isn't it, that we're taught not to get involved. We're taught that we're reporting and we have to be objective. Now, Mark, you used the word objective there, but how are you objective when you cannot stop yourself from being subjective when you've got all those feelings? If you're constantly suppressing feelings, it must hurt you. So
well, it does. Well, as I'd mentioned before, with frontline workers, first responders during the pandemic, you have a job to do. And I think what happens is when you're duty bound, I'll tell you something that troubled me because you both may know of my interest in suicide prevention and suicide prevention of youth. And you may not know this, JJ, as well as Genevieve does, but there's a fellow named Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin was leading a committee on the January 6th insurrection, and his son died by suicide. And Jamie Raskin feels like a real human being, but he was so duty bound. And I think there was a moment in which the Congress, showed something towards him, and he just carried on. And there was actually a part of me that was a little bit bothered by that, because if my child died by suicide, I just think I'd be a mess. And they did a documentary on him, and there's a book that he wrote. And what was reassuring to me is when he talked about his son's suicide, Tommy Raskin, you could just feel how broken up he was. You could just feel how much it ripped him apart. But to your point, JJ, he had a job to do. He had a purpose.
Yeah.
And sometimes the purpose, I wouldn't say insulates us from real hurt, but if we have a purpose and a responsibility and people are depending on us, we'll compartmentalize.
Absolutely. Well,
talking of part of also saving. I'm sorry, JJ.
No. I was just going to say, talking of compartmentalization, it's time for another short break right now. But we'll come back with more on that very subject right after this from our station sponsors.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And we're back with me, JJ, the Practical Alchemist, and Dr. Mark Goulston, and our very special guest today, Genevieve Piturro. And Genevieve, I very rudely interrupted you just then before the break. We were talking about compartmentalization, which is a big word that I nearly didn't get out there, but it's true that, you know, we all go through this process, don't we, of sort of putting things into boxes and then tucking them away.
Yes, I think, and I've jumped in before because it's such a compelling topic, an emotional topic. Yes, I think sometimes we do that to maybe save ourselves from just melting into a puddle that we just can't recover from. And I can't imagine a more devastating future than facing one after a loss of a child, or after so many things that are just out of our control that devastate us. And I think, unfortunately, that there are some people who feel that the work that they do and the job that they're in is not going to survive if they show this, quote, weakness to others. And that's sad. That's sad that people might use that against someone, or may think less of us if we fall apart temporarily or for a little while, even though our critics might not be able to handle what happened to us either. But it's our own fear of not being able to survive the model of ourselves that we put out there because someone is ready to use it against us. And that's sad. It's worse than sad. It's devastating. You know, as much as it is that we feel the pain, it's to feel that other people will use it or could use it against us.
Yeah. Yes. And I remember very early on in my career as a journalist being told quite openly, I seem to remember, to, you know, toughen up and play the game. Otherwise get out and, you know, move on. So it's a decision that I guess all of us in that arena have to make at some stage, or we get out. Yeah.
What do you think of the notion that one of the reasons we don't open up is, you know, the fear on the outside, it'll be used against us, the fear that someone will take advantage of us, and I think there's also a fear that the cumulative effect of not dealing with it from inside will explode. I can remember in dealing with people during the pandemic, and this idea of, you know, coping versus healing. One person I spoke to said, you know, imagine this, that you have this wild feral alley cat screaming every time you see something horrendous, and you lock it in the cellar to be able to function. Then you lock another one. Then you lock 10 more. Then you lock 50 more. And they said, then imagine that when the danger goes away, all that stuff you locked up is kind of a part of you. You know, it's your feelings that you didn't deal with. And the feeling is that if you open the cellar door just a little bit, they will all race for it. All those cats will race for it, and they will eviscerate you. They'll just come at you and they'll eviscerate you from the inside out, and you won't recover. And so, you know, part of the process we talked about in the book is, there is that fear, but what if there was a way to let one alley cat out at a time and just allow it to screech until it purrs? And what if there was a way to do that gradually until they were all let out, so you wouldn't have that fear of being ripped apart? But I thought that was a fascinating metaphor. And does that make any sense to either of you?
Yeah, it really does. It does make sense. Then my question is, how do you let them out one at a time?
I think I agree with both of you. It needs to be let out one piece at a time. And I think that's why it's healing for all of us to find an outlet, you know, for people who've lost a child or some kind of trauma. I'm sorry, I keep bringing that example up, but to find some peace in an outlet that serves others that you may know are going through the same thing or can prevent, like you're saying you do, Mark, giving it that outlet. But it must be scary to be in that position that this happened right away. And then your first instinct may not be, how can I use this experience to help someone? But if we get to that point where we can serve with this pain, that might be helping one of these ferocious fears.
I think one of the you connected to it. You could say getting together with other people who feel it. I remember years ago, one of my patients, her only daughter was viciously murdered by an ex-boyfriend. I mean, shotgunned, and her head landed in a tree.
Oh, that's awful.
Oh, it's beyond awful. And it was her only child. And she had a husband who had other children. And I didn't think I was making any progress with her. And then it took a while, but I got her to join a group called Parents of Murdered Children. And the Los Angeles chapter was headed by Doris Tate, who was Sharon Tate's mother. Sharon Tate was killed by Charles Manson. And I attended a couple of meetings, and it is a sorority or a fraternity you never wanted to be a part of, because they would talk about, this is the event, this is what happened, here is where we are in apprehending or prosecuting the murderer. And what happened is it was life-saving, because younger women, especially women of less means than her, they would start coming into the group because they were newer. Their child was recently killed, whereas her child had been killed a few years before, and they adopted her as their mother. And the fact that they could, and that gave her a purpose, that, when they would look at her, and it was interesting because, I think when you feel that deeper hurt, it's really helpful to find, and now with the internet, you can go online and identify your most specific kind of hurt and join a group where you're experiencing the same exact hurt. This is why 12-step programs seem to work. You have the same addiction, or Al-Anon, you're married to someone with the same addiction. And so I think it's really important, if you're listening in, yes, find that purpose and try to find a community that feels the same kind of hurt that you feel, where you can openly share with each other.
Yeah, and openly share in a safe space. I think that's key, isn't it? So you need to feel safe enough to be able to share all these hurts, because you don't want another wound on top of the wound that's already there. So, yeah. Yes. Fantastic.
I want to ask you something quickly, Genevieve. JJ and I want this to be a space where our guests, and we just have the conversation that the three of us are having, which is different than, tell us, what's your story? What are the 5 points from Purpose, Passion, Pajamas? Blah, 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 blah. And there's nothing wrong with that. But JJ and I are committed to creating just this space where our guests feel safe to join us in the conversation, and our listeners, when they listen in, hopefully feel lifted up that, oh, a space like that exists where people just, they're listening in to us, and we could be meeting at some pub or someplace and just having this. Are we doing an okay job of that, Genevieve?
I think so, as long as it's productive, right? And we're doing everything we can in this conversation to first let people know that they're okay. We are all feeling the same thing. Nobody's weak. Nobody is should be afraid of being outed because of an emotion that they carry. And I think that what's happening in the world is people are sharing what's been going on that they haven't shared before in their lives. Even famous people that you think have it all together. I think it's becoming more comfortable for us to say, me too. Oh, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not crazy. I'm not, nothing's wrong with me. I don't think that we want to carry on, endlessly in the space of what's wrong. I think we want to identify that this is not something that you need to carry alone. There are ways to harness the good part of sharing. There's a purpose that we can attach to being productive about sharing this. So I think if it's that direction that we're all going, trying to really help and embrace each other, then I think that's very healthy.
Well, thank you, Genevieve. And that is what we're aiming for.
Right.
And we're coming to the end of it. Unfortunately, I can't believe it seems like 2 seconds since we started this conversation, and here we are coming to the end. Yeah. And I wanted, talking of sharing, I wanted to just mention your book again, because you share your story in that book, and it's Purpose, Passion and Pyjamas. Pyjamas spelt with P-A, which I think is the American way of spelling pajamas.
Yes.
And so people can get that online. And if anybody wants to find out a little bit more, because you do coaching as well, they can find you online as well, can't they?
Speaking, coaching on purpose and the human connection, just what we're talking about.
Yeah. So it's been absolutely wonderful to have you on, and thank you so much for your insights. Mark, a final word.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, because you were talking about, Genevieve, about, yes, sharing, but then being productive. And I'm big into the sharing and connecting. And I was just thinking about when you met your future husband, because he made it safe for you to consider pivoting from that high energy executive to just go with it, with it and run with it. And there was probably a part of you that thought, oh, do you think I really can? And then he was in your corner, and he not only was in your corner, he became in your life. That's a great love story. That's a great love story.
It is. And I'm thankful that he came into my life and that he did say, go for it, because other people didn't. And that's a whole other conversation.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we've all been there. Genevieve, thank you so much for coming on our show. It's been an absolute delight to speak with you today. Mark and I have loved having you on the show. So to everybody listening, thank you very much for joining us. And if you're listening to this on the UK Health Radio podcast, do subscribe and share if you like what you're hearing, because you never know, it might help somebody out there. But for now, it's goodbye from us. Join us another time right here on UK Health Radio, and take care until then.
Thank you.